My sister knew I had spring break plans, still forced babysitting. I said no, that's when she. Jake sat at his desk, glancing between his phone and the open textbook in front of him. Spring break was right around the corner, and he had made plans with his friends to go on a road trip. It was going to be a week of freedom, filled with adventure and relaxation. After months of late-night study sessions, this was the break he'd been counting down to. A chance to forget about exams, assignments, and the pressure of his college courses. As Jake scrolled through his phone, he saw a message pop up from his sister, Emily. They weren't exactly close, not in the way some siblings were, but they got along well enough. Emily had a family, 2 young kids and a husband who worked long hours. Jake didn't mind helping her out sometimes, but it wasn't always his first choice. She could be a little overbearing, especially when it came to her children. The text from Emily was short but direct. "Hey, can you help me out? I'm in a bit of a jam and need you to watch the kids for me during spring break." Jake frowned. He had already planned his breakdown to the smallest details. The road trip was something he had been looking forward to for months. A week of hiking, sightseeing, and just getting away from the pressures of school. Babysitting wasn't part of the plan, and he wasn't thrilled by the idea. He tapped out a quick reply. "I had plans for spring break, Emily. Can't really cancel them." "Sorry." The phone buzzed almost immediately with the new message from her. This time, there was a tone in her words that made Jake pause. She was being a little too insistent, and it wasn't like her to ask for help so directly. "Please, Jake, I'm desperate. The kids are a handful, and I have so much work piling up. I know you'll be home, and I'm not asking for much. Just a few days. I'll make it up to you." Jake hesitated. It wasn't like he didn't care about his sister, but he had his own life, his own plans, and he didn't want to spend his spring break in a house full of noise and tantrums. Emily's husband, Mark, was rarely home, and it always fell on her to handle the kids. Still, she was family, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of obligation. He typed back, "I really don't want to, but fine, I'll help out for a bit." His heart sank as he hit send. He had just given up his dream break for the sake of family duty. Jake leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had hoped she would understand his need to get away, but it seemed Emily didn't think much of his plans. It was the same old story. Emily always found a way to pull him into her responsibilities when she was overwhelmed. He quickly reminded himself that it was just for a few days. He could manage that. After all, she was his sister. The next morning, Jake packed a bag of clothes, not entirely sure when he'd be able to leave. Emily had already sent him a list of tasks for the day, starting with making breakfast for the kids, followed by picking up groceries. It felt less like helping and more like being handed a to-do list. When he arrived at her house, Emily greeted him with a forced smile, looking frazzled as usual. Her hair was tied back hastily, and she was already wearing her work clothes. "Thanks for doing this, Jake. I really appreciate it," she said, her voice carrying a tinge of exhaustion. Yeah, Jake muttered, not wanting to sound too annoyed. "Just don't expect me to babysit all week. I've got plans." Emily nodded quickly, a little too eagerly. "Of course, just a few days. It's only for a little while, I promise." The kids were already running around chasing each other through the living room. Jake watched them for a moment, realizing how little he had seen them since they were born. The oldest, Lily, was 8 and full of energy. The youngest, Ethan, was only 4 and barely managed to sit still. Emily had her hands full with them, and Jake had to admit that much. Still, he didn't have any desire to spend his entire break babysitting. The first few hours weren't too bad. Jake managed to cook breakfast, clean up afterward, and get the kids settled for a bit of TV time. But as the day wore on, it became clear that Emily had left him with a never-ending list of things to do. He was tasked with taking the kids to the park, picking up groceries, helping with school projects, and then cleaning up after the mess they made. Each task felt like another brick in a wall he didn't want to build. Jake glanced at the clock. His plans were slipping away. The afternoon was winding down, and he hadn't even gotten a chance to take a nap, much less plan the details of his trip. By the time Emily got home that evening, Jake was exhausted, his plans long forgotten. Emily didn't seem to notice his frustration. She walked in, greeted him with a quick hug, and immediately went to check on the kids. "How'd everything go?" she asked, her voice upbeat. Jake managed a tight smile. "It was fine, but I think you owe me a big favor." Emily didn't seem to hear the underlying tone of his words. Instead, she simply nodded, already distracted by the kids' noise. "Of course, I'll make it up to you, I promise." Jake wanted to believe her, but as he watched her juggle the children and her work, he couldn't help but feel resentful. She knew about his plans. She knew he was looking forward to the break, and yet she had still asked him to put everything aside for her. It wasn't fair. As the evening drew on, Jake found himself locked in his own thoughts. Why had he agreed to this? Why couldn't Emily see that he needed time for himself? She was always asking him for favors, never thinking about what it cost him. As the night stretched on, Jake sat alone in the quiet of the living room, staring out the window. The road trip that had once seemed so close now felt like a distant dream. He sighed heavily. Tomorrow was another day, and it would be the same as today, full of chores, responsibilities, and no time for himself. His spring break was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do about it. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. The frustration he felt now would soon turn into something much bigger, something that would change everything. Jake woke up the next morning to the sound of his phone buzzing. He groggily reached for it, blinking as the screen lit up. A message from Emily. "Good morning! I know it's early, but could you take the kids to the grocery store for me? I have a conference call in 30 minutes. Jake groaned, rubbing his eyes. He glanced over at the small window where the first light of dawn had just begun to peek through. His plans for the day? Gone. This was how his spring break was shaping up. Nothing but errands and family obligations. The kids were already awake, bouncing around the house. Lily was at the kitchen table, flipping through a book, while Ethan was running around with his toy car, shouting, "Vroom, vroom!" as if it was some kind of racing competition. Jake could hear the familiar sound of his sister in the other room, talking on her phone with someone, probably about work. Jake stood up and dragged himself to the bathroom. After a quick splash of water to wake himself up, he grabbed his jacket and went downstairs. "All right, what's first?" he mumbled to himself, knowing the day would be just like the last. He found Emily in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in hand, already dressed for her workday. She didn't even look up when she spoke. "Can you take the kids to the grocery store, Jake? I need a few things for dinner tonight." Jake glanced at her, trying to hold back his frustration. "I thought we talked about this." "I was supposed to have my spring break." "Jake," Emily cut him off, still not looking up. "It's just a quick trip, please." "I'll make it up to you. I promise." There it was again, the same promise, over and over. She always said she'd make it up to him, but it never really happened. Jake's jaw clenched as he nodded, his heart sinking further. "Fine," he muttered, "but you owe me one, Emily." The grocery store trip was a disaster. Lily insisted on pushing the cart, but she was too small to handle it properly, bumping into shelves and knocking over a display of canned goods. Ethan was more interested in running down the aisles, shouting about everything he saw. Jake tried to manage it all, but the kids were out of control. By the time they finally checked out and got back to the house, Jake was exhausted. He didn't even get a chance to make breakfast for himself, and the time he had hoped to spend preparing for his trip was wasted. As he unloaded the bags, Emily finally walked into the room, her work call having ended. "How was it?" she asked with a forced smile. "Like usual," Jake said dryly, throwing a bag of chips onto the counter. "Just like the last time," Emily raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jake turned to face her, frustration rising in his chest. "I mean, you knew about my plans. You knew I wanted to go on a road trip for spring break, but here I am stuck playing babysitter again." Emily's smile faltered. "Jake, I don't have anyone else. I'm working full-time, and Mark's not home to help." "I'm doing the best I can." "I get it," Jake snapped, his voice louder than he intended. "But it's not like you didn't know what I had planned. You're always asking for favors, but when do I get to do something for myself?" Emily sighed, setting her coffee down. "I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't mean for it to be this way, but I really do need your help. The kids need a lot, and I can't do it all alone." Jake paused, his anger simmering. He knew she was stressed, but that didn't mean she could keep taking advantage of him. He'd been giving up his free time for her, but when was enough enough? "I'm done with this," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Emily to hear. "I've been helping you for days, and it's like you don't even care about what I need." Emily looked taken aback by his words. Her eyes wide in surprise, she opened her mouth to say something but closed it again, clearly unsure of what to say. Jake didn't wait for her to respond. He grabbed his jacket, walking out the door. "I'm taking a break," he said, more to himself than to Emily. "I need some time for me." The door slammed behind him, and Jake found himself outside, the cool morning air hitting his face. He needed to clear his head. He had been helping Emily for days, and every time he tried to express his frustration, she brushed it off as if his plans didn't matter. Jake walked aimlessly around the block, his mind racing. Why had he agreed to this? He had his own life, his own dreams, yet here he was sacrificing it all to play the role of the dutiful brother. Emily had never once considered what he wanted. She just assumed he'd drop everything for her. He wanted to scream, to throw his phone in the nearest trash can, but he didn't. Instead, he took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. This wasn't how he imagined his spring break would go. There was no road trip, no time to relax, just chores, errands, and endless demands. And it wasn't like Emily even cared. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. She knew about his plans, knew how important they were to him, and still she pushed him to do her bidding. It wasn't fair. He'd helped her out before, but this was different. Jake didn't want to feel like this. He didn't want to be angry at his sister, but she had pushed him too far. She'd taken advantage of him for so long that he had finally reached his breaking point. As he walked back to the house, he felt a new resolve building inside him. He wasn't going to let Emily continue using him like this. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew he couldn't let her get away with this anymore. When he entered the house, Emily was on the phone again, talking about work. Jake could hear the kids in the background arguing over a toy. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, then approached Emily. "Listen, Emily," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm done. I can't keep doing this. I have my own life, and I've been more than patient with you. But this," he waved his hand around the house, "is not what I signed up for. I need to get away, and if you're not going to respect that, then I'll find a way to make it clear." Emily's face went pale as she looked at him, her phone call forgotten. She opened her mouth to say something, but Jake held up his hand. "I'm not asking for much, just a little respect. You can't keep using me like this." For the first time in days, Emily seemed to understand. She looked down, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't realize how much this was affecting you." "I'm sorry, Jake." Jake nodded, feeling a small sense of relief wash over him. "Good. I need a break. I need time for myself. I won't let this happen again." The next few days felt like they were dragging on for Jake. After his conversation with Emily, he thought things might change. But the truth was, nothing had really changed. Emily continued to treat him as if he had nothing else going on, as if his time wasn't valuable. Jake couldn't stop thinking about how easily his sister had asked him to drop everything for her. He had tried to be understanding, but now it was clear. Emily was taking him for granted. She knew he was a good brother, always there when she needed help, but in return she never really considered his needs. He had to do something that would make her see the price of her actions, not just for him, but for everyone she'd ever manipulated. Jake didn't want to lash out in a way that would hurt their relationship forever, but he knew he couldn't keep letting her walk all over him. The idea hit him late one night while he sat alone in his room. He could feel the frustration building again, but this time it wasn't just anger, it was the beginning of a plan. He smiled to himself, his eyes lighting up. It wasn't going to be anything drastic, nothing too big, but enough to make Emily understand that she couldn't keep expecting him to sacrifice his happiness. He wasn't going to babysit her kids anymore, and he was going to make sure she knew exactly how it felt. The next morning, Jake waited until Emily was in the other room, dealing with her usual work chaos. He quietly texted his friends, telling them he was going to need their help. It wasn't going to be anything too complicated. Just a little surprise. Something that would send a message. He had always known Emily had a certain level of pride. She liked things to be neat, controlled, and in order. Her house was always spotless, and she was obsessed with everything being in its place. But what if he could turn that against her? What if, for once, she couldn't control everything around her? That afternoon, when Emily was still deep in a work call, Jake and his friends slipped into the house. They were careful not to make too much noise as they entered through the back door. Jake had already planned everything out. His friends would handle the heavy lifting, and he would be the mastermind behind it all. The first thing they did was remove all the chairs from the dining room, replacing them with mismatched ones from the garage. Next, they turned all the family photos upside down, just slightly, so they were still visible but a little off-kilter. Then Jake's friends took the kids' toys and scattered them across the living room in chaotic patterns, making the space look like a whirlwind had hit. It wasn't a huge mess, but it was enough to throw Emily off. The idea was simple: make the house feel unsettling for her, like she couldn't control her environment for once. After about an hour, they finished the setup. Jake stood in the middle of the room, surveying the scene. He felt a small sense of satisfaction, but also a bit of guilt. Emily was going to be mad, but maybe it would be the wake-up call she needed. Just before they left, Jake left a note on the kitchen counter. It read, "Enjoy your break, Emily. See how it feels to have things out of your control for once. Love, Jake." He felt a rush of adrenaline as he stepped out of the house and headed toward his car. His friends waved him off, each of them excited to see how things would unfold. Jake didn't know how Emily would react, but he couldn't wait to find out. That evening, he kept himself busy, texting his friends and keeping his mind off what he had done. He knew it wasn't the most mature move, but sometimes people only learn when they're forced to face the consequences of their actions. He wasn't going to feel sorry for her this time. Around midnight, Jake's phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "What did you do, Jake?" Jake grinned. She had found the mess. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he waited for her to text again, and sure enough, a few minutes later, another message popped up. "Why would you do this to me? I've been working so hard, and you make a mess of everything. Are you trying to punish me?" Jake took a deep breath, not wanting to dive into an argument just yet. But he knew Emily needed to understand. He typed his reply carefully. "No, Emily. I'm just showing you what it feels like when your life is out of control. You've taken advantage of me for too long, asking me to drop everything for you. I have my own life, my own plans, and I'm tired of always putting them on hold for you." He hit send. Then he sat back, waiting for her response. It didn't take long. "I never meant to make you feel like that. I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't realize how much I was asking of you." Jake felt a flicker of relief in his chest, but it wasn't enough. This wasn't just about the mess. It was about Emily truly understanding the consequences of her actions. He couldn't let her off the hook that easily. "You need to understand that I have a life too. I can't keep dropping everything for you, no matter how much you need help. If I don't speak up now, I'll never be able to live my life the way I want to." There was a long pause. Jake started to wonder if she had fallen asleep. But then, a new message arrived. "I get it, Jake. I really do. I've been selfish, and I haven't thought about how much it affects you. You were right to call me out. I'm sorry." Jake read the message, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. Maybe this would be the turning point in their relationship, the moment when Emily realized that family wasn't about constant sacrifices or taking advantage of someone's kindness. It was about respect. Jake didn't reply right away. He wanted to give Emily time to think about what he had said. It was hard for him to be this direct with her, but sometimes you had to be harsh to make someone see the truth. The next day, Emily called him. "Jake," she said, her voice soft, "I'm sorry for everything. I really took you for granted, and I can't undo what I've done. But I want you to know that I get it now. I'll do better. I promise. Jake smiled to himself, a sense of satisfaction settling in his chest. It wasn't over, but it was a start. And that was enough for him, for now. Jake felt an odd sense of relief when Emily called him the next day. He wasn't sure if it was because of her apology or because he had finally done something to stand up for himself. Either way, things were slowly beginning to change, but he knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Emily had apologized, but he could tell it wasn't just about the mess anymore. It was about the deeper issue that had been brewing for years. Over the next few days, things were awkward between them. Jake wasn't used to having these kinds of honest conversations with his sister. They had always had a decent relationship, but this was different. He had taken a stand, and for the first time in a long time, Emily seemed to be really thinking about it. One evening, after a long day of doing schoolwork, Jake was sitting on the couch when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "Can we talk?" Jake paused. He wasn't sure if he was ready for another conversation, but he also knew that this needed to happen. He replied, "Sure, what's up?" It didn't take long for her to call. When Jake answered, Emily's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Jake, I've been thinking about everything. I'm sorry for what I did, and I know I've taken advantage of you before. But I want you to know, I'm not going to ask you for favors like that again. You deserve to have time for yourself, just like everyone else." Jake's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in a long time, Emily sounded genuine. He had heard her apologize before, but this time, something felt different. "I appreciate that, Emily," Jake said, his voice calm but sincere. "But you need to realize that I've always been there for you. I never asked for anything in return. I just need you to respect my time. I've got my own life too, and I can't always drop everything." Emily was quiet for a moment, as if letting his words sink in. "I get it, Jake. I really do. I've been so focused on everything I have going on that I never thought about how much I was asking of you. I'm sorry." Jake sighed, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease. He wasn't sure what had changed, but he felt like Emily was finally seeing things from his perspective. It wasn't about the mess anymore. It was about respect, understanding, and giving each other space. They talked for a while longer, discussing their feelings and the things they had both been holding in. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it felt necessary. By the time they hung up, Jake felt a little lighter. Emily had apologized, but more importantly, she had listened. The next day, Emily sent him a message. "I made dinner tonight. It's my way of saying thanks for everything. I'm going to make sure I respect your time from now on." Jake smiled to himself as he read the message. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to him. Maybe things were finally changing between them. A few days later, Jake was at home finishing up some homework when Emily showed up at his door, carrying a large casserole dish. "Hey," she said, standing on the doorstep. "I made enough for both of us." "I figured we could have dinner together, just the two of us. No kids, no distractions." Jake smiled, feeling a little surprised. He hadn't expected Emily to actually follow through on her promise to change. But here she was, showing up with food, ready to spend time with him without any expectations. "Sounds good," Jake said, stepping aside to let her in. "Thanks, Emily." They sat down at the table, eating together like they hadn't done in years. It was nice, just talking and catching up without any stress or obligations. Emily even apologized again, this time for not being more considerate of Jake's needs. "I think I've learned my lesson," Emily said, her voice soft. "I don't want to take advantage of you anymore. You're my brother, and I want us to be able to help each other out without it always being one-sided." Jake nodded, his heart warmed by her words. "I'm glad to hear that. It's been hard for me to say no, but I know now that I need to." "You're right. I deserve to have time for myself, too." They talked for hours, sharing stories about their childhood, their parents, and their lives. For the first time in a long time, they felt like they were reconnecting, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Later that evening, when Emily was about to leave, she looked at Jake with a serious expression. "I've been thinking, Jake. I don't want to push you anymore. I know I've been asking too much, but I also want to make sure I'm doing my part. I'll find ways to manage things better so you don't have to always pick up the slack. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride in his sister. This was the Emily he had always known, strong, capable, and willing to learn from her mistakes. I appreciate that, Emily, he said, standing up to walk her to the door. And I want you to know that I'll still be here for you, but only when it's right for both of us. No more pressure. She nodded, giving him a small smile. Deal. As Emily left, Jake closed the door behind her and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. It had taken a lot to get to this point, but he knew it had been worth it. Sometimes standing up for yourself meant shaking things up a little, making people realize their mistakes, and setting boundaries that would lead to healthier relationships. He wasn't sure if things would always be perfect from now on, but for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he had a sense of control over his own life. He wasn't a doormat. He wasn't just someone people could rely on whenever they needed something. Jake had his own dreams, his own plans, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him, not even family. And for Emily, he hoped this was the start of a new chapter, one where they both learned to respect each other's time and needs. Maybe it was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction.